So, and why Iran and why now?
I think that's a big question that everybody is asking, not just in the world, but especially here in America, where we had a presidential campaign that featured most of the voices in the White House: the president, the vice president, the deputy chief of staff, the secretary of defense, all proxies for the president, including the president himself, stating conclusively he will not be invading Iran. He will not be starting a war with Iran. Less than a week earlier, we had a 2-hour speech, the longest speech ever for a State of the Union to a joint session of Congress, in which the president only dedicated one paragraph to even mentioning Iran. And then a few days later, we are in the middle of the largest naval and air superiority campaign that the United States has had since the Iraq War 25 years ago. That's the biggest question on people's minds. What you're saying, why Iran, why now? The president is trying to put out explanations, but at this point, there's not much other than talking points, highly produced videos. But in terms of having a press conference, he has yet to do that to explain to the American people why this is happening.
Hmm. I hear not many people support Trump on this. So, what's his logic?
Well, I will say that his supporters, many of whom are very loudly saying that they are in support of this. And in fact, there are many supporters of Iranian independence who are very much in support of this as well. However, I don't know if we can describe that as being a majority of Americans, specifically given the fact that he campaigned again on not invading Iran, and he has turned off a significant portion of the president's own support, who did not want to see another Middle East war or the United States to start another war. So as far as the reasons behind it, we can only say, as the United States has done officially, that the United States joined a war that Israel began. Israel began the attacks against Iran, and it was then joined by the United States. It is undetermined exactly the timeline, given the fact that the president has been cited as giving the go-ahead for this operation earlier around midday on Friday. And then obviously we saw all the operations begin about 12 hours later here in the United States, sometime in the middle of the night. So again, people remain puzzled by this, but we do know that this is not an action that was initiated by the United States. It was initiated by Israel, and then the United States joined in thereafter.
Mm-hmm. Andriy, this operation is purely from the air with no ground troops. Doesn't that look unusual?
Very unusual. We know that a similar campaign was waged in Libya to aid the people who were uprising there. And then within a month's time, that entire country devolved into sectarian violence. This is the plan that has not been laid out. Neither the president nor the Secretary of Defense, who spoke today to the press for the first time since December 2nd. This is the second time that he's spoken to the press since that time. Have we even, but we still don't know what the plan is after the fact. They keep saying that they do not want to reveal to the press or the world what their next steps are, as if the enemy will be listening to them explaining that they want peace in the region. There is no State Department building of resources for the people. And lastly, I would say this is a very large country with tens of millions of people, and there is no plan for accommodating any refugees that might stream out of Iran, given the fact that this will be a weeks-long aerial deployment against this country. And at this point, there are no international resources being manned up to make sure that we can support anybody who is streaming across the border in fear. We've already seen some countries evacuate their personnel, like China and others. But as far as native Iranians, if they choose to leave the country, what are their options?
Maybe Trump hide his plan?
I think in all actuality, it is. One reporter said that either the president of the United States is a man with a will of steel, the kind that no other president has had before, or he is a sociopath. And they mentioned this because this weekend, I mentioned that the president made his decision on Friday, and then he flew down to Mar-a-Lago, his Florida resort, where not only did he set up a makeshift war room, but they were also, this is a rental facility. They had the facility rented for a wedding. And then he was doing a fundraiser. And then he was speaking to private members of the club at a dinner. I don't know of any war in history that's begun by a president and then he starts having a fundraiser. He attends a wedding. He starts talking about his plans for building ballrooms in DC, and he's not concentrating on the war. He's not getting. He's not sitting in the Situation Room in the White House, and yet this is the way the president has decided to conduct again the largest military campaign that the United States has engaged in since the Iraq War of 2003.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Trump says it would take another 2 or 3 weeks to eliminate Iran's leadership. But isn't that unrealistic without a ground operation, especially to say it publicly?
Yeah, I believe still the rhetoric coming out of the White House is that they are calling on the people of Iran to replace their leadership themselves, notably without any weapons, given that this is a repressive regime that has been in place for 50 years now. This is not a situation like Iraq. This is not a situation like Syria or other countries where a change of leadership has happened. Venezuela, for instance, that dictator was removed, and the United States is now working with a repressive vice president who's become president there. But the entire system wasn't changed. But in that case, that country does have a history of democratic rule prior to the rise of Chavez. Here in Iran, we're talking about 50 years of repressive rule, and prior to that, being under the rule of the Shah. So you really don't have that civil society to rely on. Especially with the number of killings and targeted killings of people, not just throughout the last 50 years, but especially in the past year by this repressive regime. So who exactly it would fall upon to take the next mantle of leadership from a civil society perspective is a big question mark. It's more likely that President Trump is more than willing to work with the next leader of the ruling Shia clerics than he is with some kind of civil society, just like he decided to work with the existing regime in Venezuela, as opposed to turning to Ms. Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Trump making this operation without any plan. It looks like the US may be investing in future problem with Iran, because this operation doesn't change the system. It may only make it angrier.
Yeah, and again, it's because there's nothing else to rely on in Iran. It is only this repressive regime that has been there for so long. The longer you have this repression, this is an issue with the enemy of Ukraine and the world, Russia. They've been under a repressive regime for centuries. So to turn to them to hope to have a democratic regime, that would never happen in our lifetimes very easily. And here in Iran, you have a regime in place that has repressed people, that has completely decimated any kind of civil society all throughout the last 2 decades, when we've seen protest after protest, whether it's this past year, whether it was 2012, other successive protest movements. Almost all of those protest leaders have been eliminated. Anybody who is actually interested in improving democracy in that country has been eliminated. So there is a decided lack of civil society to rely on in that country. And when you're talking about not having a plan, it seems if we can turn to what he has done before, like Venezuela, the president is more than willing to work with an established regime simply after killing off the supreme leader, the Ayatollah.
Mm-hmm. If we talking with you about some plan, maybe we talk about something bigger. I mean, if this strike cuts Iran from India, Iran off from India and China, are we looking at something bigger than just an attack on Iran? I mean, many oil going to China, going to India, but now Trump cuts India from Russian oil and from iron oil, and China have something maybe same.
I think what you're definitely pointing to is the suspicion that the policy wonks at the Department of Defense, of which there are not that many, but there are people who are decidedly focused on other concerns. On the State Department side with Marco Rubio, one of the main reasons it's believed that he wanted to change the leadership in Venezuela is because that now deprives Cuba from the oil supply that they had consistently from Venezuela. And that has been a concern for Marco Rubio his entire career. Similarly, here we know that the Defense Department personnel that the White House hired are very concerned about addressing China before Russia, and here eliminating the source of oil from, if it's possible, to eliminate the oil supplied from Iran to China, you're talking about 20% of that nation's oil supply. And if you're going to attack, if you're China and trying to attack Taiwan, having 20% of your oil eliminated, that's a big issue for any future war planning. I would expect to see China see about increasing their oil imports from Russia in that case, because they're not in the same place that Cuba is. Cuba was almost entirely reliant on Venezuela. Russia has tried to send oil, but it's almost impossible to get through any blockade to Cuba. So much in the same way that Venezuela was used to influence a potential future change in Cuba, it is believed by some that changing the leadership of Iran will prevent China from becoming more militaristic and trying to invade Taiwan.
And one more thing, Russia didn't help Iran. Does that signal weakness?
I think we're seeing a lot of people who are within this cringe alliance, as they call it, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. Systematically, a lot of these leaders have been taken out. Syria, we know has been changed. We've seen Venezuela, still a lot of corrupt leaders, but at least Maduro is gone. And it is a question of how Russia continues if they set up this international, especially the Black Sea fleet, not Black Sea, but the Black Shadow Fleet of oil trading, which they were in charge of, even though oil would have come from Iran, oil would have come from Venezuela. Russia was dictating where these deliveries were coming to. And now that entire market has shrunk to whatever Russia is producing for the most part. I believe that Russia will be exporting more directly to China, even further lessening the need for a shadow fleet. So in the end, Russia will obviously have less places to sell and buy oil to and from. But I think the real issue there also relies on what the price of oil is. And we know that within the last 36 hours, oil futures and oil commodities have increased dramatically, the price of oil, given the fact that the Strait of Hormuz, through which at least a quarter of oil supplies travels every day, has been effectively shut down during this conflict. That's not going to be so even if you cut off oil supply, the fact that the price of oil increases, that still gives Russia some revenue with which to use to attack not just Ukraine, but other countries as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and finally, how does this affect the negotiation process? Does it distract from peace talks between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I think the biggest harm from this event is the fact that the other countries that would be involved in any negotiations with the United States will have even less of a reason to believe that the United States is negotiating in good faith. Mr. Witkoff was supposed to be talking to representatives from Iran today. That's not happening because the United States decided to launch a war, even as they were saying that they were negotiating in good faith. I think that's an issue for many countries that will need to be put together for this coalition to maintain Ukraine's security. And I think that's going to be the biggest question, less so how does Russia relate to future negotiations. Russia will continue to attack Ukraine. We know that they are anticipating to ramp up their attacks even more throughout the spring with their Shaheds, with their ballistic missiles. But in the end, what will get them to the negotiating table still has to develop, because Russia is not serious about sitting down at the negotiating table. And until such time that we see a change in who they send to negotiate, we know that more pressure still needs to be applied to Russia.